Go ahead.
Good evening and welcome to the Old Man Therapy Podcast. Our special guest today is the Reverend Willie Bodrick II, Senior Pastor at 12th Baptist Church, Roxbury, Massachusetts. And before we go on taller at on the pastor here, first I want to say, what's up, Mitch?
Hey, what's going on, Bake? Good to have another episode here with you, and we got a great guest. Once again, Devon has found someone that I definitely want our audience to learn from.
Awesome, awesome. So, without further ado, and I have to say here, this is one of my 1911 brothers right here. He's on the purple and gold side of that right
Yes,
here.
sir.
So I don't want everybody thinking that all I do is kind of skew it to Morehouse and Kappa and all that stuff. I know people outside of Morehouse, but he is from Atlanta now. He
Born
is
and
an AT
Okay.
alien. He is an AT
Okay.
alien now.
Watch
You
back.
know what I'm saying? Went to Mays High School, played a little
Oh,
football, all
okay.
that now. Oh, yeah, this the man right here now. And so
Yes.
now he's up here in Boston doing his thing. He running the city. He might be the mayor one day. You never know,
Hey,
or
that's what I'm
whatever,
talking about. That's what
you
I'm
know.
talking about.
So if I get caught up sometimes and don't put the Rev in front of it, please, ladies and gentlemen, don't think I'm showing disrespect, but this is my man right here. We go back and so Rev, man, I just want to also commend you just all the great things you've been doing in the Boston area, all the great things you're doing for your church, and right now your church is celebrating a milestone anniversary. Can you speak about that real quick?
Yeah, so we're excited at 12th Baptist Church. We're celebrating 185 years as 12th Baptist Church, 220 years from the first African meeting house, and it's just been a great year. Our theme this year has been built to last, and considering all that we're going through right now in the world. One thing that has been assured is that we've been built to last, and we're going to continue to be that beacon of hope, that beacon of love, light, life, and liberation for not only Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, the city of Boston, but for the country and the world. And so we're excited. There's so much of a legacy and a history of that church that I've been blessed to pastor, and most importantly, a legacy that we continue to carry. I know we'll talk a little bit more about it tonight, but it's just been a great kickoff to a great year. But it's a milestone year and a what I would consider a milestone moment in this country, and we're glad to be able to both center and centralize joy, but also talk about our history and resilience in the midst of difficulty, which gives us hope for even our future.
Awesome, awesome. Now, can you share your personal journey? What led you to ministry? And ladies and gentlemen, this is a very well educated and smart man because I'm gonna tell you, he's a product of Georgetown University as well. So we dealing with them smart cues right here, boy. Look at- you know what I'm saying?
I mean,
He gonna cut me up in a minute now.
Cues.
Man, don't let him. Hey, Reverend, don't let him talk to you like that. Don't let.
I'm on his show. So I'm a roll with him. I'm a roll with him.
Oh, he gonna
Okay.
hit me. He
Okay.
gonna hit me with a lightning bolt in a minute. Now, it's just some thunder about to come right now,
Oh
boy.
man, I mean,
Exactly.
the story starts with my parents. My dad's originally from Orangeburg, South Carolina. My mother's from Charlotte, North Carolina. They meet actually in Iowa. They are both HBCU grads. My dad, Johnson C. Smith University, was a two-sport athlete, played football, ran track, SGA president, all that good stuff. My mother was a two-sport athlete as well at St. Augustine's College in Raleigh Durham. And so, there's just some tenets and foundational things a part of my legacy, and it starts with my foundation, and that's my faith in God, but that's also my family, my parents. They meet at Iowa State University, and when they're doing their masters, my dad was doing a master's in community planning and regional development, and my mother was doing a master's of education. My dad graduates a year before my mother, and he has the calling on his life. He comes down to Morehouse School of Religion at ITC, where he did his Master's of Divinity degree. And then my mother, a year later, comes down to Atlanta, following. They got married in Iowa. They came together and continued to build a family in what many would call the Black Mecca of this country. And so, it's in that context where my dad eventually pastors a church, my mother's working in Atlanta public schools, that I kind of have my first interaction from birth, inception. I was actually born at ITC. Like, if you have a picture of my dad when he graduates with his second master's and his master divinity degree, I'm in his arms, and
Mm.
we were on that campus. So there's a huge part of the spirit of not only faith, a spirit of Atlanta, a spirit of legacy that played a big part in ministry for me. My parents were always serving. My dad pastored the Fairfield Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia, for 10 years. And then he eventually went pastor Shady Grove Baptist Church in Watkinsville, Georgia, right outside of Athens. And so we used to commute. For my whole life, we after the 10 years my dad pastored in Atlanta, I think I turned 9. I was turning 10. And he took over this next church, and our lives shifted. So my mother was like, "We ain't moving to Athens," and so we, we commuted, man. So when my dad first took the church, I never forget it. We would go Sunday, Wednesday, Saturday, Sunday. So 4 days out of the week, we were driving back and forth from Atlanta to Athens. So outside of school, football, baseball, music, play saxophone growing up. So I got to see ministry in a very urban context. My dad pastored it. Fairfield was in Oakland City. And if you remember Oakland City in the 90s, it was not, that's when Fort McPherson used to be Fort McPherson, not the Hollywood studios that it is today, because of our
Yeah.
good brother. But it was a very tough community. And growing up in Southwest Atlanta, being in Ben Hill, being in Adamsville, being in Cascade, all these areas, Sandtown, to see my dad's work in that community, it really just helped me really think through part of the calling that I thought was already on my life. And then my mother was an educator, so I was always toying back and forth between, like, am I going to be like my mama and go be an educator, be a principal? Am I going to be like my daddy? And what's interesting is that sports allowed for me to kind of continue to chase out a lot of dreams, right? Like every kid, I wanted to go play in the NFL, wanted to play in the MLB. And I grew up in Atlanta during a time where I would say it was the black capital for all of those things happening. I mean, the Braves were the blackest it had ever been when I was growing up, right? It won multiple Super Bowls. You folks, Ron Gant, what I'm saying, Dion came in, you had Kenny Lofton, you had the crime dog, Fred McGriff. And then you have the football teams, and you have, of course, Deion Sanders, Brian Jordan, Algie Crum. It was just this culture that was being curated in Atlanta that I think was at its apex when I was growing up. And so, as I'm thinking about all of these different things that were coming at me in the world, where it was also about, what was happening in my context. When I was in elementary school, I was being raised to be a leader amongst my peers. And I think that played a role in how I began to see what I could do with my voice. Um, I was a page for the Georgia State House Rep, page for the Senate, all these different things, SGA president, all these different things. And as I got to high school at Benjamin Elijah Mays High School, I think they really nurtured and poured into me in ways that allowed for me to diversify all of who I was. Fast forward, I end up going to play ball in college at Georgetown University. I played football at Georgetown, and it was a blessing. Every little kid wants to go play D1 ball, so I was blessed to be able to go do that, with the aspirations to go to the NFL. And it was during my collegiate time where I believe I was running for ministry, but ministry wasn't running for me. And so I'm in this moment in college where, one, you're trying to figure yourself out. You're trying to understand, who you are outside of the blessing of a bubble of parents and a community and folks who loved on you and cared for you. And then it was also this dynamic of, all right, well, I know I have this calling, but I was scared of that calling. And so what I would do is I would call myself, I would be God adjacent. I'm gonna join the gospel choir because that's easy. I can sing and I can jump in the
Mhm,
gospel choir.
mhm.
There's not a lot of accountability in the gospel choir
Mm,
in
mm.
college. You
Yeah.
know? Ain't nobody gonna call me pastor in the gospel choir. I was a part of a group that really built out this thing called
Excuse me.
GU Brothers for Christ. I was on the Protestant Student Forum. And it's interesting, although I was like hiding, like I'm not the pastor, I'm not a minister yet. Even my coach, these are pretty much predominantly white coaching staff in college. When it was time to pray, guess who they called on? Me.
The pastor.
And see, I wasn't in here exactly. And at that time, and it's funny. There's some things you don't really appreciate until retrospectively looking back upon them. And I think that in that moment, and I can tell you for a fact, when I graduated, I worked in Southeast DC, and I was trying to be in education. I was working at the Seed Public Charter School. If you ever seen the movie Waiting for Superman, it's a movie about the public charter school movement, and the movement that was happening. And it was during a time where Michelle Rhee came into DC and really ripped that place apart. And 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 it was just an interesting moment where what was happening. But also in college, I was coming out of a moment where the first black president was elected when I was in DC. Like I remember
Mhm.
running to the White House the night he won, right? And so that was my 21st birthday when he was inaugurated. And so it's these moments that have been crystallizing for me. And when I got to DC, got to Southeast, actually working in education, I thought that was what I wanted to do in its entirety, but there was still something not fulfilled in me. And what I realized was that, I was running from a calling that was already upon me. And not that education is not something that's not dear to my heart because I still am very involved in education, but it wasn't all of what I needed for that moment to feel that I was doing what God was calling me to do. And so, I'm one of them people. If I feel like God is saying do something, I prayed about it. I applied to divinity school. I only applied to two schools, and I got into one and got denied from the other, and the one I got into was Harvard, and that's how I found my way in Massachusetts, man. And I kind of prayed to God. It was kind of one of those things. I said, God, if this is what you really want me to do, you're gonna get me into one of these places. I kind of gambled on it. I was
Exactly.
like, look, because I was still trying to get away from it, and God said, nah, you ain't gonna get away that easy, Willie.
Yeah.
So
Here we
that's
go.
what brought me there. My parents, my father pastored. I can't deny that. I look at my life and much of what he did, I'm doing, and I've been blessed to see it up and personal, and being able to amplify that. My dad's also an Omega. Spring 1980 road chapter in Johnsonville. So he was the first in my family to do that. I carried on that legacy. He pastored, and I was blessed to see that. And though we pastor in different contexts, I have to say much of what I learned from what I experienced growing up as a young man, and then going to DC, being at places like Metropolitan Baptist or Shiloh, or eventually at Alfred Street, being able to see all this, going up to New York and being an Abyssinian. I mean, it became clear. All right, you're ready. This is where God wants you to be. And these are the people I keep putting in your life to help shape you to do that. And so that's what made me finally do it, and I'm glad I did.
Oh,
Yes,
awesome.
yes, yes.
Awesome.
I'm sorry, Bake. I just want to say one thing. As I'm listening to you talk, as I'm listening to you talk about your family and your parents, and success is not by accident. Success is not by accident. Dude, you just listening to you talk about how your parents were, and I mean, Devon and I both had educators in our family as well, that instilled in us, some form of education. You got to get it, but success is not by accident. And I mean, I want to applaud your parents for getting you here.
Oh man, thank God for them each and every day. I mean, I think
Yes.
they gave me all they had, gave me and my brothers all they had, and we just wanted to take it to the next step and do the same for our children as well.
So, Rev, I got a two-part question for you. What does being the senior pastor of 12th Baptist Church mean to you? And And we already talked about it, kind of jumped into it a little bit earlier. The deep history 12th Baptist has, and how do you honor its legacy while shaping the future?
Oh man, that's a great question. Well, first and foremost, I think to talk about 12 Baptist Church is not just to talk about Black church history; it's talk about American history. I am honored, and when you ask that question about what pulled you into ministry, I feel like God has a sense of humor to me, and He's been kind of showing me for a long time that this is where He wanted me to be. I just couldn't see it because I didn't even know what to look for. I remember being in college and tripping over um, a placard in Foggy Bottom near GW because me and my frat brothers were out there a late night talking junk, having a good time, and I trip over a placard, and little did I know who the person was. I'm waiting for one of my chapter brothers. I start reading this placard, and the placard is of a man named Leonard Grimes. Leonard Grimes is a brother who is probably one of the greatest Black men in American history. Leonard Grimes is from out of Virginia, and Leonard Grimes is someone who was active in the abolitionist movement. So much so that when he is in DC, he gets arrested as an operator on the Underground Railroad because he was using his company to aid and free folks who were enslaved. He ends up in New Bedford, and during New Bedford, which makes sense because Frederick Douglass has a house in D.C. and a big one in New Bedford. So he's a part of this underground movement, and he ends up in New Bedford, and he ends up coming to 12th Baptist Church upon the request. And I can tell you the long story about how we get there. But the reason I talk about him and the connection to my ministry, I don't realize who he is until I come to 12th Baptist Church. But I remember that moment being in my 20s before I even got to 12th Baptist or even knew 12th Baptist was, tripping over the Leonard Grimes statue and placard that's in Washington, D.C. And so God had been sprinkling these moments in my life, letting me know where I'm going, what's going on. 12th Baptist Church history starts in the early 1800s. And we're talking about right literally the year 1800. We're seeing African Americans, free blacks who are in the north end of Boston, and they're at the north slope of Beacon Hill. And during that time, as you know, many other denominations, folks were either holding racially segregated services or they were having very subpar experiences within the Christian community. And so black folks do what we always did, was say, we don't have to deal with this. And so they began to do this work of organizing. And so, in what's now called Faneuil Hall and Franklin Hall at the time, they're having these sort of non denominational meetings, and they were being led by this brother by the name of Thomas Paul, who was a Baptist preacher out of New Hampshire, Black Baptist preacher out of New Hampshire. Um, in community, around 1805, Reverend Thomas Paul, along with MC Scipio Dalton, along with Mr. Cato Gardner, and so many others, they addressed letters to what at the time were known as the white parent churches. These are the churches: First Boston, First Baptist Church of Boston, Second Baptist Church of Boston. They were the power players. And so what they make a request is that they can start an independent Black Baptist church for people of color in the city of Boston, for Black folks in the city of Boston. And so that's what they do. They make this request. And in August 8th of 1805, in the Master Vinyl Schoolhouse in the city of Boston, 24 folks came together and had their first church service. And after that, they began to work to construct a high church in 1806. And they're beginning to build this church. And that church stands to this day. It is a 600 member, accommodating church that was built and finished in 1806. And so by December of 1806, they installed Reverend Thomas Paul, who had been organizing them, to be their first pastor. And they have a dedication service, and that building is what we call today the African Meeting House. And so fast forward,
Mhm.
um, for years, the African Meeting House is literally the hub of activity in the city of Boston, particularly for Black folks, is where folks organized, is where social and political events were happening. It's where the anti-slavery meetings were happening. Actually, William Lloyd Garrison, one of the greatest abolitionists of American history, founded the New England Anti-Slavery Society in the African Meeting House. And so this was the center, the cultural center of Black life in Boston. Fast forward from 1812 to about 1838, we get to a brother by the name of Reverend George Black. Reverend George Black is a native of Portland, Maine. He's a part of what was known as sort of the African American reformist movement. Reverend Black is a powerful man, and he actually changes the name from the First African Baptist Church to the First Independent Baptist Church of Color, of people of color. And so he changed the name because there's this independent church movement happening. There's this shift of Black folks trying to make a case to America, and also this distancing from quote unquote the Africanness to be quote unquote American, to be seen as human, to see seen as a person. And we can look back and say that, you know what, that we can judge whether that was a well worth effort or not. But this is what was happening during that time. Um, but this is in the heat of the abolitionist movement, right? This is in the heat of the tensions. Think about it. You have things like David Walker's appeal, who's in the background of this happening in Boston, and you have some of the revolts that are happening down in the South and are happening that folks are all interconnected with. And so, within the body of the church, of the First African Baptist Church, now known as the First Independent Baptist Church of Color, there start to be some tensions. And if you didn't know, Black folks back then were not much different than Black folks right now. And when tension starts to arise, things get a little contentious. And so even in the church. Um, I was just, I've been going through the stacks of Boston Day and Evenings of the time, and it got really hostile. What many people think, I think there are a couple of different factors of what happened from 1838 to about 1840, because the church actually doubles in membership during the time of Reverend George Black. But there's great tension in the church, and many people argue that the tension in the church is the issue of slavery. What is the role of the church, and what are church folks going to do, or what do church folks don't think they should be doing in regards to this major issue? And there were folks, like any issue, there's nuances, right? There were some folks who didn't want to be involved in the movement to bring folks up into the church. There were folks who didn't see that as the church's role. This is supposed to be the spiritual center. And then you have folks who are saying, well, then what's the gospel about? But literally the liberation of people, right? And so there are folks who say it became a highly contentious issue around the issue of slavery and abolition and the strains that it put on this congregation. Be that as it may, in 1840, there's a church split. That split is George Black, who is the pastor of the church, splits with what some say between 36 and 46 members, and they physically withdraw to and establish themselves in a loft building adjacent to the church. And so now, I always talk about this as a very interesting moment in our history, because that 1840 split is what we consider a defining moment in our church's history. 1840, there are two churches now. Well, one congregation split into two churches, and both were claiming to be the bona fide church. So you remember when the Temptations had two groups at one time?
Yep.
I don't remember it. I had to watch the movie, but y'all do.
I knew it gonna come back. Yeah. Here we go. Here we go.
But that's what was happening. Who was going to be the bona fide church? Now, the story goes, and it's sort of proved out to be that in history. The group that left with George Black, they were the group that were fighting to say, we need to be more aggressive on this issue of slavery. We need to be on the abolition side. We need to be pushing. We need to be doing this. Others were saying that the other congregation was a little bit more reserved. It's not that they didn't think the issue was an issue, but they didn't see the church as having such a role in that way in this particular movement. And there are various impressions upon why people thought that. But it created a great tension that it actually forced a real difficult conversation and eventually a split. And so for 2.5 years, watch this, both churches are arguing back and forth with the Boston Baptist Association who's the legitimate and bona fide church. So when you ask this question about 12th Baptist Church history, this is really the sort of the underpinning of the establishment of 12th Baptist Church. So the fight would have kept going if George Black didn't die. George Black dies in 1842. And so what the white Baptist churches, parent churches, thought was best, let's try to force these two congregations back together. But you know how some of us get in our community, like if you got a beef, some of us hold that beef until death do us part, unfortunately.
Exactly.
And they couldn't get the congregations to come back. They even took a approach of trying to bring in a more progressive pastor that could be that can meet both congregations in the middle, and John T. Raymond, but he couldn't even do it. He ends up leaving, going down to Abyssinia. He said, "I'm gonna go down to Abyssinia. Y'all got this one." So they couldn't quite do that. They were trying to bring them under the banner of Belknap Street Baptist Church, because it was on Belknap Street, which is now Joy Street. And so they couldn't quite do that at the time. And so the two congregations never come back together. For about 5 years, from 1840 to 1848-ish, that congregation that split with 40 members, they were struggling. And it was even worse because the other congregation, whom the pastor and the 46 members left, as soon as George Black died in the church, they tried to they excommunicated all those people from the rolls. And so there was no going back at that point. So for 5 years, from 1843 to about 1848, they were doing pulpit supply, bringing folks in. Eventually they get Leonard Grimes to come, him and his wife, Olivia Grimes, and he becomes the first pastor of 12th Baptist Church in 1848. We're called 12th Baptist Church because we had to reestablish as the 12th Baptist Communion at the time, but it was the 12th Baptist Church in the city of Boston. And that's why we're called 12th Baptist Church. Many people mistakenly call us 12th Street. There was no 12th Street. It's just 12th Baptist.
This church.
But our history starts in 1840 at that split, that moment around the activity. And you can tell who we become, because under Leonard Grimes, we become one of the largest church in the Boston Baptist Convention, and we become the church that was known as the Fugitive Slave Church, because we were one of the hubs on the Underground Railroad. And that legacy is a huge legacy for us. And people talk about, that great history, even when you get to the Emancipation Proclamation, that there is no watch night service without 12th Baptist Church, right? The reason we have this is because Frederick Douglass and them were awaiting a call from the president to see if he signed it. And all the abolitionists were here in Boston awaiting for a call. It was like a telegram or something like that at the time, to hear back. And when they found out they signed it, they were all celebrating, and they had the after celebration at 12th Baptist Church, January 1st, 1863. And so this legacy is a part of who we are. We have folks like Shadrach Minkins and others who were freed, Anthony Burns, who were arrested and they were taken back to the South, and we put money together as a church to purchase his freedom. Like, that's who we are. That's who we are at the core of who we are. And so when I became pastor, carrying the legacy of folks like George Washington Williams, who's the second pastor of 12th Baptist Church, who wrote the first two history books of African American history in America. When I think about people like him, if you ever seen the movie Tarzan, he's being represented by Samuel Jackson in that new Tarzan movie. That's him. He's the one that was fighting for King Leopold. And so when I think about him, I think about folks like Matthew A.N. Shaw, or I think about J. Allen Kirk, or I think about Dr. William Hunter Hester, who was, mentor to Dr. King while he was here at 12 Baptist Church, to Dr. King and to Michael Haynes, who's the 12th Baptist pastor of 12 Baptist Church, who's longstanding pastor and civil rights leader and state representative. When I think about folks like that, and I think about Reverend Dr. Arthur T. Gerald, who was my mentor and brought me into 12 Baptist Church in that way. I think about a legacy that is a part of the great American tradition, a part of the great Black church tradition, and that is to make sure that we are a cornerstone of faith, but we are a church of love, a church of light, a church of life, and literally a church of liberation. And I believe that's the role that we have, particularly in the moment that we're living in right now. We have to be a church that's continually organizing, that's working to liberate folks, and somebody has to have the freedom to resist, particularly when the empire is going crazy all around us.
There you go. There you go, Reverend. I mean, that was. I hope my audience is out there with their phones hitting, Googling all them names that you're spouting, because I know I didn't know half of them, and I'm gonna have to listen to this and go, okay, who we talking about? Who we talking about? But what I want to talk about, excuse me,
God bless
guys, I have that. Ed, thank you. I want to talk about, and you were kind of getting to it at the end of what you were talking about, faith and social justice. The Black church has always had a key role in social justice. Just talking about the history of your church, how do you see that role today in what's going on in the world, and what are the most pressing challenges you think facing the community of color, and how faith can help that?
Yeah, well, I always start with the Black church isn't a monolith, but the Black church will always be. Um, and what I mean by that is that the Black church, at its best, has always been more than just a place of worship. It's fed those who are hungry, clothed those who've been naked, educated those who needed education, been the hospital for folks who've been sick, um, has literally been a place for a meeting place of gathering. Um, and I always talk about the Black church, particularly in the American context, um, as having its ancestral roots in our history, and it traveled with us, right? Like our belief in God didn't start when we got to these shores. And so, Albert J. Roberto talks about the invisible institution and how even in situations where our rights were limited or our little physical bodies were controlled, we still found ways to express, to organize, and even to resist through faith. And I think in this moment, we're witnessing probably one of the most dangerous moments of my life, I can say. And many would agree, where threats on humanity, deliberate and coordinated efforts to roll back all of the progress that our ancestors bled, sweat, and died for. Um, you see the attacks on DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, and you see this intentional attack on the erasure of our history. Um, this grab at the cultural icons to reestablish white supremacy in ways that I've never seen in my life. And this has been bubbling though. This has been bubbling. And I think the Black church has to be clear about racism, about hypercapitalism, has to be clear that this isn't just about politics, but this is about our humanity and a worldview of folks who do not see us as human or definitely does not see us as equal. And so I think we must continue to stand in that prophetic tradition. Um, I think it's always ironic that people are like the Black church and social justice. I'm like, what do we mean? And those should those should be like peanut butter. That's just who we are. Like it should be who we are, and that's why I started by saying the Black church is a monolith, because not all Black people ascribe to faith in the same way. And that's not a new thing in our country, but it is something that is very present with the tools that we have. And so I think we should be calling out injustices. we should be equipping our congregations and our communities with the tools and the education to resist what's happening in our country. We should make sure that we tell our stories and that we don't allow anybody to erase our history. But as I was telling my wife the other day, I was like, look, you can try to erase stories, but you can't erase the people. You can't erase our imprint. You can't erase our impact. You can't erase our sound. You can't erase our resistance, our fight. And so I think we have to be able to tell our stories. And just like our ancestors, we got to be committed to speak truth to power, and be able to be comfortable in doing that, because what they're going to try to do is gaslight us into believing that what we're saying ain't making no sense. But we know, because we know our history, that this is a moment where strong voices and people of faith, particularly Christians, need to stand up.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I definitely agree with that wholeheartedly. Um, I want to get into another part of the church. And Devon, I mean, if you want to get into the mental health part, you can.
Oh, okay. Yes. So we know that faith is often a source of strength in hard times, especially these times we're going through right now. How do you counsel those struggling with mental health? And what advice would you give parents trying to raise children in today's world?
Yeah, I think this sort of ties in your former question, because I think we have to start with the condition in which we're living in as a people and as a community. Many of folks are dealing with a lot of systemic inequality, um,
Mhm.
real economic disparities that have impacts on our community. When you're talking about the social determinants of health, when we're thinking about the ways in which folks have been affected historically, and even presently. You look at home ownership, you look at the ways in which lending practices have impacted us, the ways in which economic and even educational opportunities in many ways have been either limited, how people have struggled to have access to capital, and even when you think about the ways in which mass incarceration has impact on those dynamics, there are many pressures and even triggers that create trauma that is overwhelming. And it shows up not only in folks who are dealing with what people will see as a very diagnosable example of mental health, but we all struggle with some form of mental health, right? Like we all have a mental health and we all vary upon spectrums of that mental health. And some have varying issues that may need more attention and clarity. What I personally believe is that faith is a source of strength, but I've never thought that prayer alone is the solution to all mental health issues. I think it's prayer and therapy. It's prayer and your doctor, right? Like God didn't just bless me with a gift. He blessed my wife, who's a psychiatrist, with a gift as well, which she sees that work as her ministry. And so I think one of the biggest mistakes we've made in church, um, is that we've done a bad job of treating mental health as a part of all health, right? That a mental health issue is similar to having respiratory issues, right? We diagnose it, we treat it, and we acknowledge it, right? And I think there's a danger in putting faith up against science when faith and science have always been able to not only coexist but work hand in hand. Your faith isn't weak because you're dealing with mental health, right? And we shouldn't treat you being a weak person because you went to go talk to your therapist or your psychiatrist or your psychologist, right? The Bible tells us in Proverbs that a wise person seeks counsel. It's okay to embrace therapy, to be in community support groups, to talk to your pastor, but there's some things that I'm not qualified or have the expertise to do, and I have the humility to say, you know what? You might need to talk to my wife or one of her colleagues, or you might need to talk to someone else who has this. I'm going to keep praying with you. I'm going to keep supporting you, but I want to be honest about what mental health is and the issues that arise, and know that the church, while we can be attendant to a lot of issues, we don't have to be able to solve all issues. And I think that's important, because I do believe God meets us all where we are. And I encourage folks to seek professional help, to lean on community, to remember that even Jesus needed some rest, right? Like, that's just a real right. Like
Yeah.
even Jesus cried. Like it's nothing wrong. You don't have to ignore your humanity and your pain to still have faith in Jesus. One of the things that we have been doing at our church, and I want to shout out my wife, Dr. Devin Cromartie Bodrick, because she had launched a program post COVID, which was really focused on Black churches in our community, ensuring that we talk about mental health and mental wellness post COVID. And she had all the pastors, myself, our church, 12 Baptist, St. John's Baptist, as well as Roxbury Presbyterian, all these churches on Warren Street in Roxbury. And they began to do this work in a community advisory board to have these discussions. We had town halls where we had over 120 people show up after church to a town hall about mental health. And this is something we've done in other churches as well. And really, the goal was to eventually create what we call wellness ministries. And we just really launched our wellness ministry at 12 Baptist Church, which for us is aimed to promote a holistic physical and mental wellness within our church community, and providing what we would consider comprehensive programming, information, resources, and where there are specific needs, we're partnering with the Black Church Vitality Community Advisory Board project, and we're doing this work in partnership with Boston Medical Center to enhance and help to create the sustainability so that folks know that there are resources at the church that can support you. And we just believe that God, along with the love and the guidance of those who are professionals, can help anyone, support anyone through those difficult moments. And so that's who we are as a church, and I'm not afraid to talk about that. When I've preached some topics. One of the things I do personally in my preaching, when I preach on sensitive topics that might trigger someone, say we're talking about sensitive topics that may be about mental wellness, or maybe about sexual assault, or maybe about suicide. I give a forewarning for people to log off or even leave if this might not be a sermon that might be best for your mental health. I do that from the pulpit. I've preached about situations that might trigger thoughts about or conversation around suicide. Before I start with the suicide hotline. Or at some point in my sermon, I'll say, hey, call 988. If you're somebody, we want to let you know that God loves you, we love you, we want to put our arms around you. And if you're in a crisis right now, call 988. I think that's the job of the pastor. And that's the job of the church. And for us to ignore the realities that people are dealing with, then we're not doing our job as a congregation. And I think it goes the same with children. I think it's harder in the moment in which we're living in. I got a 5-year old. My brother has a 3-year old. I've worked with young people throughout my career. Like raising children today is very hard. Like it's just hard.
Mm.
I thought things were bad when I was younger, right? They got tools and instruments, and they got technology in ways that we just did not have. Man, I was one of the first people on Facebook. Now there are apps I don't even have, right? Like they're communicating in ways, and I understand the struggles of parents who are trying to balance, right? Not only like the systemic issues of racial tension, or trying to have like housing stability and job stability, but the digital distractions are real, right? School to go to college costs so much. I looked up Georgetown the other day. It costs $90,000 a year
Yeah.
to get into
Yeah.
Georgetown.
Yeah.
That's not reasonable, y'all, to get an education. And I'm very proud of my institution. I love my school, but I remember when I was there, it was 65, 70. And to think in 15 years, like, where are we going from here? Like, where do we end up? $200,000 a year for school? And so I think there's so many factors in a world that's becoming more and more competitive, more and more globalized. And so, how do we make sure that we teach our kids to love who they are, to have affirmation in self before the world tells them what they should think about themselves, before the world tells them how they should navigate the world, before the world tells them how they should think. And so I deeply believe in moments like this, foundations matter, right? You talk about my parents, like Giving your children a strong faith foundation, I think it really, really matters. I think you have to be open to allow them to think and be critical thinkers and be curious. Like, I don't think it's been healthy when we shut people down and not let them ask no questions. Because here's what I realized: if you don't answer the question, mom and dad, church, if you don't answer the question, somebody has an answer for them.
Right.
And so I always believe like God ain't afraid of our questions. And I had questions when I was a child. I expect our young people and our children and our church to have questions. And here's my thing to folks all the time: if you don't have the answer to the question, that's okay too. Like, your honesty and transparency means more to them than you making something up. And so I think it's important to have that honesty and transparency and be able to say, you know what, I don't know it right now, but I will come back with an answer, or I'll find somebody who does have an answer. I think that creates more trust than anything else. I also think, right, like, what do we want to teach them? Like, teach them who they are. Like, tell them about their children. We live in Boston. So, our kids interact with a whole lot of people different than what I came from. I went to high school, it was 99.9% black. Like, even when Katrina happened, we brought in a whole bunch of more black people from New Orleans. Like, it just very real black. It was just real black. That's just kind of how I grew up. Like, I can count the number of white teachers I had in my life on one hand. And so it's just a different context. And I had a different level of empathy once when I moved away and went to other places. And now being in Boston, the importance of teaching your children who they are, having them understand where they are, what's going on, who they are, how the world sees them, but also how they can define themselves to the world. And then I think, like, love and justice and truth, transparency, honesty, like, those things matter. And I think what we're seeing in this moment in time, like, what happens when we throw truth out the door, when we throw honesty and integrity out the door, when we throw justice and love out the door, we see what happens when there is no grounding. And I think, like, allowing children to be themselves, right? Like, I know my child is different than me, and it's cool to watch him develop. And I'm like, he a lot like me, but he ain't me at all. And to have them have that space to let them become whoever God is calling them to be. And so, most of all, I tell people, keep praying for them, like, prepare them and pray for them. Um, there's only so much we can do to help them navigate this world, but if you give them a firm foundation of faith, and I believe if you root the right values in them, right? Like Lily the verse says, train up a child in the way they should go. So when they are old, they won't depart from them. Those things are critical and core. And you can tell when someone doesn't have that anchoring. You can tell when a child didn't get that foundation, and you can tell what it's like to search for it for your whole life. And I'm thankful that we are in a community, because it is, every family dynamic is not the same, but that's what church is all about, right? Like, you can still get that strong foundation. You can still have folks who can step up and be those parental figures, guardian figures, aunts, uncles, grandmothers, grandfathers that you need to hopefully instill those values in you so you can become all that God wants you to be. So I think that's important for our young people as well.
Dude,
One more thing I want to shout out. You know, Rev, you are the president and CEO of the American City Coalition.
Yeah, yeah.
And so Tommy, if you catch the T, see the T, that's the transit system here. And you got the T, and then you got the buses. On the back of the buses, you see this man's face on the back of some of the city buses here in Boston, man. It's a great. I was riding one time. I was in my Silverado. I like, what the? I like, that's my that's my man right there. He on the back of the bus and
my
everything,
man going down.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He going down on the bus, and
Yeah.
so, and we also served on the board together, the Roxbury
Yes,
YMCA,
yes.
and he was also the chair of the board for the Roxbury YMCA, and he's on so many different boards and all this, this, that, and the third. So, Pastor, how do you personally balance being a pastor, a community leader, a family man, and he's also an entrepreneur? He's a principal with a group called Ambry Development. Him and his brother started, and I'm blessed to work with them on the projects that they have. So, I mean, and plus we're all WBs, He's WB Willie. Oh, did we lose you?
I think we lost him.
Oh, hopefully he'll be right back.
Yeah, we lost him. Hold on. He's loading.
Okay.
There he is.
Yep. We lost you for a minute there.
I'm not sure what just happened, but
No worries.
No worries.
We'll edit that. Don't worry about it. But
Yeah, but
go back to your question, Devon.
Yeah. Rev is also an entrepreneur as well. He's a principal at Ambry Development. And how do you personally balance being a pastor, community leader, and a family man, entrepreneur, all those things?
Yeah, he's having a connection problem. Hold on. Think he's coming back. Yeah. Okay. You back?
I'm
Can you
back.
hear us?
I should be good, man. I apologize for this.
Oh, that's
No, it's
fine.
all good.
All
Yeah.
right.
I don't know
Hit your
I feel like I have like this connector, and it be jumping back and forth in my office. So I apologize about that.
No
that's
worries.
cool. Okay, ahead, Devon, ask your question again. That way I can kind of edit it.
Okay. How do you personally balance being a pastor, community leader, and a family man?
Yeah, I work on that. I'm working on that. I think one of the best things is that you talked about TAC, you talked about you know, um, 12 Baptist. Everything I'm doing is in Roxbury. So like that's the beautiful thing about that, right? Like I don't have to geographically go too far. At one point, my son was in the preschool at the church. My wife was at BMC down the street. I was at TAC and 12. So I literally was doing everything within literally a 1 mile, not even a radius, 1 mile. And so that was I was living on Moreland Street. Like I was like everything was like I could walk to everything I needed to do. I think a big part of what I've been learning about balance, I've also had to ask myself, like, what am I doing? Like, what does this mean, right? And what's at the core of this for me? Um, a big part of it is justice. Like for me, like what does my work call me to justice, and how does that look in every form, right? One of my favorite verses in the Bible is Micah 6:8. What does the Lord require of you to do justice, to walk, to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God? Like that's something that's core to what I'm doing, and I see that being reflected in a lot of different ways. Um, that for me is what I consider healing in some way. My word, I think, for my life for the last few years has been to be a steward of wholeness. And so I see all of my work of building both family, faith, community, people, and even literally the spaces in which we are operating in. And so my work at 12 Baptist Church is that pillar of faith and people, and really creating community with intentionality and bringing wholeness to people, both spiritually, emotionally, and even intellectually, right? Because I don't think you leave your brain at the door of the church. Like you bring that in there with you. I see the work at TAC. We do economic development, workforce development, research, and policy. And that work is really about community and resident identified barriers and working in community to help address many of the issues that have been emerged in our community and to address those issues through those various lenses. And so we have programs that focus on economic development, that focus on policy work, focus on workforce. We launched Roxbury Works when I became CEO, which is focused on middle skilled workers having access and opportunity in three sectors: life science, biotech, healthcare, and blue green tech. And so, in every way, I feel like I am working to bring wholeness to something that was broken, right? Like we shouldn't have to have this economic development plan in our neighborhood, but because we've been deprived of resources, investment, people have been scared to come over there, all these other things, systemic, lack of investment, then we have to have these plans to bring wholeness to that which is broken, right? Like there should be on ramps and opportunities for folks to get into jobs and have easy access and opportunity. But when there aren't those opportunities, or there are barriers that have kept people away from those opportunities, when there are systemic dynamics that have kept people from opportunity, then we need to create mechanisms, programs, initiatives to actually bring wholeness. And so that's really the work. And then even now, I just read the Globe with last week, Devon. It said we're 220,000 units away from being able to make sure that we can adequately house all the people that are coming into Massachusetts, into the Commonwealth. That's how many units we need to build. And our community, we're the first ones to really feel it, right? When there's a housing crisis, it's our folks that can't afford to stay in the neighborhood. It's our folks who didn't have the opportunity to have home ownership. It's our folks who don't have adequate workforce housing or affordable housing, or even just nice market units that would be good to stay in the neighborhood. And so my brother and I, we launched this company really just saying, look, there's a problem that's broken. Some broken things are happening in our housing systems, and we need to be at the table to do something about this. And so we began to work to we're building 12 units in Dorchester right now, and we're doing another project in Roxbury. And so we're really working, and this is affordable home ownership, because for the folks that got displaced out of Roxbury, Dorchester, Mattapan, for the folks who want to find some stability and be able to afford to stay in the city, somebody needs to be building that type of housing. And one of the things that the church has taught me, um, many are called, but few will answer. And the way I look at this is that, you know what, while I have breath in my body, and while God has given me the chance and given me these gifts, skills, and opportunities, I want to use all that I have and all that I've learned, whether it was when I worked in government, whether it was at a law firm, whether it was here in business, whatever I have learned, whether it's been in church, whether it's been in community organizations, use that to hopefully bring about wholeness. I believe that's what the triune God is all about. That's what unity is all about. Like, how do we take that which has been broken and bring it back into its rightful order and make it whole?
Brother, brother, yes. I'm telling you, you've been a great guest, man. And honestly, your every aspect that we've asked you, you've given great answers for. I know you've educated our audience on everything from the history of your church to the things we need to do in our own communities, to work within faith, to get where we need to go. So I'm gonna ask you something. So I'm going to kind of explain something. So I believe in dreams and I believe in goals. Dreams is something like, I want to run a marathon. My dream is to finish a marathon. But to get to that dream, I got to set goals. My goal is to get up on a Thursday morning and run my 7 miles. That's my goal so I can get to my dream. What would your dream for communities outside of Boston? What would your dream be for other African American communities that are not within your sphere of influence? And then my second part is, what is a goal somebody in that community can set to start getting to that dream?
Yeah, I think the aspiration is for particularly communities all across the country is to live like whole lives, right? Like that are deterred from barriers, that allows for them to have the access and the opportunities, that what I would call the equivocation of standing and positioning in community, that no matter what zip code you live in, no matter what block you live on, you have the same access and opportunity as any kid in any other neighborhood in that space. I dream that folks can actually have opportunities to live out those dreams, right? Like that they can actually set goals, that would get them to their dreams. It's funny with the framework you put together, Brother Thomas, is that like a lot of people do set those goals. Like they do dream, and they are disciplined. They are getting up at 5 a.m. They are doing that. And sometimes, man, it's not them, it's the systems they're operating in. It's the people that make the decisions. And so, I pray that, we create more vessels and not blockages for our own people. Um, I pray we stop hiding the ball from each other, right? Like a lot of
Yeah.
times it's not that like somebody don't know. They just only certain people can know, right? And so like, I think, we have to be very transparent and honest about like how community actually works. Um, Depending, I think across the country, you can look at any statistics. Even if you're talking about Boston, whatever I'm saying, there's somebody in Atlanta, somebody in Orlando, somebody in New York, somebody in LA. I was just in San Diego. I'll be in Charlotte tomorrow night. There's somebody in every one of those cities talking about the exact same issues: environmental issues, economic issues, education issues. Right? It's the problem is that we're seeing this and experiencing this across the country. So what is it about what we want to do? And so I hope that through our work, we can begin to see the assets in our community, build those assets in our communities, create the type of education that will sustain all of our children, that will give all of our children the opportunity to find an on ramp into a career that will sustain their lives. I pray that we can love each other better. Um, and I think to start a lot of this work, you got to get involved. What's always disappointing for me, and I'm not saying that voting is the solution to everything. Nah, it's not. Um, but you get what you vote for. And what I would also say, you get what you don't vote for. And I think a lot of times when the systems, we don't realize the systems have impact on us until the system has an impact on us. And I think we got to start organizing, right? Like I was blessed to, I worked for some great politicians. One being Deval Patrick. I was working for Together PAC. I worked for Mara Healy when she was the AG, ran community engagement for the state. I worked as deputy financial director for Martha Coakley, and I mean I've had this very robust political engagement and career. And the biggest thing I can say is that we got to show up. They've depended on folks not showing up. They already know. I can look in your neighborhood, in your district. I already know who ain't gonna turn up. I already know who ain't gonna show. We don't even realize we can have whoever our hometown hero is win a bunch of elections if we just showed up. That's it. And so what I would hope we do is begin like, we have these forums on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X, Blue Sky, whatever's your thing, TikTok, or got shut down. But like one of the things the Black church has always done well is like we know how to meet and we know how to get back into the room together and say, look, what are we going to do to address this? And so I would say if there's an issue in your neighborhood, in your community, start to organize. Find the people who also see this as an issue, right? Like don't just talk about it at the local bar and just talk about it when y'all go out. Like let's say like let's put a plan together. Like what are we going to do to address this issue in our community? And what you find out is that it's more nuanced to changing those issues. And if you would have known what you've been known, you would have been able to actually address many other issues. You need to know who your neighborhood associations are. You need to know who the folks who are your neighborhood captains or your street captains. You need to know who's all part of your local councils or your school boards or your select boards. Like you just need to know. Like the way in which many of these movements actually start and happen is because folks just start to get involved. The Tea Party was created by saying we're going to go into local neighborhood associations, local school boards, local community meetings, and we're going to push all the people who feel the same way we feel into these spaces. And what they did was that they start to flip communities, then they start to flip districts, then they start to flip the country. There's a lesson in that because I watched that playbook play out. We saw it with MAGA. That wasn't no sophisticated. They went on TikTok. They started to figure out in their barbershop conversations. They were going to NASCAR events. They were going to their places. And so I think if we want things to change in our community, one, you got to be willing to go into the places where our people are, right? Like it can't be right. This conversation is happening up here, and then but we're talking about the people down there. But you got to be. And the one thing I love about church, and I know I'm biased, it's the one place where the millionaire,
Mhm.
person on Section 8, sit right beside each other or serve together. And that don't happen many other places in the Black community. Maybe at the Y when you're lifting weights. Maybe boys and girls club. Maybe your kids on the same team, depending on where you want your children to be. But the Black church is one of the places that sort of breaks down the barriers of class and wealth and station and allows for people to be in community with each other. And I think that's where we can have meaningful conversation. And so I would encourage folks, one, just get involved. Like, do the research, get involved, know the people who make decisions. And if you don't like those people in making those decisions, change the people who are making those decisions. Put forth policies, put forth ideas, get that in front of people, organize with the people that you care about. And I think that begins the process of making things happen. Most real movements start locally. And they start with people just coming together in a church basement, and they end up creating schools like Morehouse. Isn't that right, Devon?
Hey, you never lied about that one. That's what happened. Hey,
But
Oh,
that's literally what it is. We need to educate our children. We need to create opportunity for folks to go out and to help change the world and change community. What we gonna do about it? Where we gonna meet? I offer my church. If you want to have a meeting, come on down. We'll set up space for you. But I mean that with intentionality. Be in community with each other and begin to address these issues. We need that right now more than ever, to be in community with each other. We need to be able to do that work, and we need to be able to do it with intentionality. And I think that's important, because it's going to get hard these next few years, and we're going to see radical changes. But there's some things that haven't changed, and that's the way in which our people have survived the American empire since they set foot on these soils in 1619. And as they've been able to communicate with each other, they've been able to organize with each other, and they've been able to protect each other. And that's what we're going to have to do in this moment right now.
yes. Oh man, I think when I edit this, I'm gonna have Mahalia Jackson music playing in the background while you talking. Cause brother, you took us to church today. You
Oh man,
definitely took us to church today.
Mahalia Jackson,
Um,
I love her. Also throw some outcasts in there, man.
there you go.
and little AT aliens. I got you. I got you. Hey, how can our audience, if they want to keep track of you, keep track of your story, listen to
Yeah.
you preach on a Sunday, how can they do that?
Well, you can go to 12th Baptist Church on YouTube. You can subscribe to our YouTube. We're on Facebook as well. Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, now X. We're on all of those platforms. You can also go to our website at tbcboston.org. If you want to follow our work at the American City Coalition, you can go to tamcc.org. And then if you want to follow me personally, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram at Will Beamer. Is my name. I never changed that. I want to keep that. That's me on Instagram
Uh,
and on Twitter. Follow me. I try to be as accessible as possible. I'm working on that rest thing that you all were talking about, balance. So I golf. I golf now since I tore my Achilles. I've been
oh,
golfing. Yeah,
yeah.
I tore it right what 8 years ago now. So
Mm.
I needed to find a safer sport where I could still talk junk like I'm a DB, and I don't know. So, I golf a lot with my brothers and with some of my good frat brothers and friends all across the Commonwealth. I'm in the Boston Black Golf Association. I mean, follow me, reach out. I can say this in a moment like this. I feel like God is calling me to preach to this moment. That's where I've been in my whole life, and I think this is a moment where it's called for me to speak to truth to power in the way in which I've been blessed to do so. And so I'm going to continue to talk about these issues from the pulpit. I mean, we're gonna encourage our people from the pulpit. We're going to equip our people from the pulpit, and hopefully build community with folks so we might continue to get through this moment together, because we're going to need each other, old and young. We're going
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
All right,
That's
hit us
right.
with it.
That's right.
Hey,
We be
So,
hitting
I
it.
just try to be in line with the theme of the
Hey,
show, man. I'm trying
yeah.
to.
Hey. Well,
so
see, this is some old man therapy
Oh
going
old
on
yeah,
right
man therapy. Yes. So we have been speaking with the Reverend Bodrick, senior pastor at 12th Baptist Church in Roxbury, Massachusetts. Sir, I have completely enjoyed this conversation.
Likewise.
Devon, thank you for introducing us to this young man. Do you got anything else for us, Bake?
Well, he ain't that young now. I mean, because some people, it's all about perspective. Some people might call him old. You know what I'm saying? Like my sons or somebody else be like, "Who's this old man talking to me?" So, but no. There's nothing else I wanna add. Only thing is that just stay alert because I would love to have you as a regular, not just to talk about faith issues, but all types of issues, because you're very well versed in so many different things, Rev. So this is my man. We, like I said earlier, we have the things in common. We the WBs, Wilton,
Yeah,
Bacon,
yeah,
Willie,
yeah.
and all of his brothers are WBs. So
Yeah, yeah.
So this is my brother, man.
It's not
This
wrong.
is really my brother.
That's
Well,
So even though he wear a little purple and gold, you know what
Hey,
I'm saying.
hey.
But I still mess with him. You know what
So
I'm
the
saying.
streets of heaven are paved with purple and what?
Well, they say gold. I don't know about no purple now. But all I know, boy,
oh,
hey,
well.
I was watching in the crimson blood. You know what I'm saying?
all the walk on the streets of gold. I get it.
So as our brothers of the Divine Nine go back and forth, I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your day to speak with us. I really do appreciate it. And like Devon said, hey, if you ever just want to come on and talk, that's great. And also, we may reach out to you if we have a topic that we feel like you definitely can educate our audience on.
Definitely, man. Well, let me just say thank you to you both. I appreciate this platform. I think we need more platforms to have healthy discourse and dialogue, and even to show joy. To see three black men laughing, having a good time. I think that's a good example, not only for our young people, but for all people to see that we can have these conversations, that we can talk about real issues, but we can also have a good time together. And I'm excited to come back anytime y'all want me to come through. Even if I can just poke in, just say what's up and say hello and just touch base with y'all, that'll be great. But I'm humbled, honored. Happy Black History Month to both of you, because what you all are doing is Black history as well, capturing our community voices, capturing these moments and these times. And I promise you, in time and perpetuity, somebody's going to look back at these podcasts and document, what was happening in the world today. And so it's important that we do that. So thank you all for doing that and bringing your wisdom so that we, us young folks, might be able to continue to go forward.
Yeah, he gonna kill us.
Here we go. All right. Thank you so much, sir. You have a great one.
Man. Check in. Looking forward to talking to you again. God bless.
All right.